Welcome to this week's edition of Jungle Drums. This week's a little bit different. It was not streamed in front of a live audience. I'm afraid I was just way too tired Thursday night. I just wasn't quite up to it. And also I didn't have any guests for this week. I could have maybe tried to organise something, but you know what? I said, hey, it's fine. We'll just make a nice short version of Jungle Drums where it really is just jungle drumming about this week's tech and gaming news. So let's jump right into it. My first article is from The Verge, and this is about the Xbox One X, which, as we all know, is being released next week. Hopefully should get mine on Tuesday. Of course, it'll be the Project Scorpio edition, and there's actually a very good chance that next week's Jungle Drums is going to be just all about the Xbox One X, having a look at it and what we think of it so far. But anyway, the latest bit of news to drop about the Xbox One X has been its ability to support 1440 displays. So, right, we know that the Xbox One X was the 4K console. It was going to be rendering natively at 4K. Things like Forza 7 were playing at 40k, 60 frames per second. Right, we knew that. And then, as we learned more about the One X, we then learned that you could still hook it up to a 1080 display. And, you know, games would quite possibly run better. And then on games that had 4K assets, if the devs coded it in, it was going to do a neat little trick where it would still render at 4K, output at 1080, and use super sampling to make the images and, you know, all the graphics just that much finer, you know, a higher pixel count in the rendering aspect. Obviously, you can't change how it displays. Think of it similar to the I believe NVIDIA calls it DSR factors. You can do that, you know, on your desktop. You can simulate 4K on a 1080 panel. There's even some games that do this. Euro Truck Simulator 2 is a prime example where you can set this a graphical setting. You can either have 100%, 200, 300, or 400%, and again, it simulates 4K graphics and actually does take up a bit more graphical horsepower to use it. But so anyway, we already knew this about the Xbox One X, but what we have now found out is that the Xbox One X will have, eventually, support for 1440 monitors. It's not going to be ready immediately, but it is coming soon. Because, let's be honest, a lot of gamers out there have made the jump from 1080 to 1440, but haven't fully committed to getting 4K displays. It's very popular at the moment to have 1440p displays with very high refresh rates. You know, for things like G-Sync and whatnot, 1440p panel with 144 Hz refresh rate, or even 200, is supposed to be just the awesome gaming experience. One thing that hasn't been confirmed and is basically speculation is that the Xbox One X could theoretically also support variable frame rate on FreeSync monitors. Remember, FreeSync is the AMD version of G-Sync. Also, FreeSync monitors tend to be quite a bit less expensive than G-Sync monitors, so just something to consider. So it's a nice bit of news. I don't know if I would necessarily buy 1440 panels just for the sake of the Xbox One X. I mean, yes, it is a nice kind of in-between experience. Remember, 1440p is kind of colloquially called 2K. But you know what? I just think if you're going to make that jump specifically for the console, you might as well just go all in and try to get a 4K panel, because this is just kind of an unknown quantity. We don't know, okay, what kind of frame rates we're going to be getting. I mean, it's the same at 1080p. We know that games are going to be probably running at 60 frames per second at 4K. You would think at 1080 they'd run even higher, but I really doubt it. I don't think the Xbox One X is going to have the ability to output higher than 60 frames per second. It doesn't seem to be that was their target, because let's be honest, most televisions, which consoles are kind of aimed at the TV market, don't tend to have more than a 60 hertz refresh rate. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. We'll soon find out. We'll have a hands-on next week. Right, my next bit of news is actually from Forbes. And, you know, again, this is a subject that's actually all over the internet. And, of course, it's about the newly released Super Mario Odyssey. If you recall, we talked about this quite a few weeks back, saying that, look, it's most likely going to be one of the highest reviewed games ever. And, yes, sure enough, according to Forbes, Super Mario Odyssey is already one of the best reviewed games ever. We've got a few folk at Scholarly Gamers who have actually been playing Super Mario Odyssey, and yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that opinion's split. There's a lot of things about it that are just stunning, that are amazing, and then there's a lot of things that are also kind of, you know, very familiar, and I think that's maybe where that game's success is going to come from. The feeling of familiarity, but then also so many new things, nice updated graphics, you know, it runs nice and smooth. But I mean, GameSpot, IGN, EGM, GameSpeed, they've all been given it 10 out of 10. You know, Edge and Famitsu, obviously they posted their reviews quite a while back. But then, you know, sites that aren't giving it a 10 out of 10 are still in that 9.5 to 10 range. You know, so it's definitely, the meta score at the moment is 97. So that's pretty darn good. Only 5 games have ever gotten higher than that. And as you can imagine, it is tied with Breath of the Wild. But no, it looks great. I mean, to say what IGN has said about it just very briefly, Mario's games have been around for almost as long as game consoles have been a thing. But thankfully, he's always evolving. We rarely get the same Mario twice. Super Mario Odyssey delivers on that ongoing promise of originality and innovation. It distills the venerable series' joyful, irreverent world and characters and best-in-class platforming action, and introduces a steady stream of new and unexpected mechanics. It's all spun together into a generational masterpiece. So there you have it. You have yet another reason to purchase a Nintendo Switch. I know a lot of folk out there have been on the fence because, let's be honest, for a long time it was a Zelda machine. There was very few games outside of Zelda that made the purchase worth it. If I'm being honest, I think there's still only a handful of games, but there are some really good ones. But just give it a little bit of time. There's more and more games coming to the Switch as each month goes by. And, you know, it's not a bad platform. One of the interesting things about the Switch is, according to surveys and whatnot, most people tend to prefer their Switch in undocked mode, which is interesting because there was a lot of speculation before the Switch released that basically it was just going to be a home console. Most people weren't going to bother with undocking it and taking them out and around with them. And according to the stats, the opposite is actually the case. Right. A few weeks back, we talked about, and it was a rumor. Well, it was a rumor, yet it was a confirmed rumor. We knew that Razer had an announcement to come out, and we also kind of knew that it was going to be a phone. Because remember, we talked about this a few weeks ago, so I won't go into those details. You can see the link down below for that episode of Jungle Drums. But hey, Razer finally, came out with their official announcement. So I had a quick article from the Business Insider, and basically talking about how a gaming company has just announced a high-powered smartphone geared for gamers. But its best features, its price. If we look here in the UK, in fact, let's do the official trailer for the Razer Phone. I mean, as you can see, it's aesthetically, it's quite nice. It's a nice black. Obviously, you've got to have that Razer logo. The 120 hertz display is quite impressive. It's also at 1440p, which makes it a 2K display. But this is the standout feature here, the Dolby Atmos dual front-facing speakers with dual amplifiers. That music is just going to be absolutely stunning on that phone. Same with the dual cameras. I've seen a I've seen a few examples on the internet of people posting their pictures from the Razer Phone because, as you can imagine, with any new device, there's been early versions, released to influencers so they can hype up the actual release of it. And the camera quality looks great. It's an Android phone, obviously, and that's the only thing that steers me away. I know it sounds ridiculous. I can code in Java for Android. That's what I did last year at school. We were making apps for Android, and you would think that, wow, so this phone is obviously going to be something I'm going to grab. It must be something I want, and it isn't. This is clearly aimed at gamers with a 2K display with 120 hertz refresh rate, and it's got a really good, well-sized screen, 5.72 inches, so it's big enough but not a complete handful. The front-facing dual amplified, amplifier for each speaker, and the speakers, the full length of or full width of the phone rather, with Dolby Atmos, just looks amazing. I'd read a review earlier in the week where the journalist had said they were in a conference room and they had music coming out the phone and it just filled the entire room. THX certified Dolby Atmos is quite impressive to have in a phone. The headphone experience is also certified by THX, but that's where it gets a little bit interesting. The phone doesn't have a headphone jack. It comes with a dongle, so as we kind of got used to on other phones, you have to share that port with it's got the one port to do everything, to charge it, to hook it up to a PC, and then using the dongle to put in your headphones. But aesthetically, it looks absolutely fantastic, and price-wise is quite interesting. Over here in the UK, it's only available through 3 at the moment, and you can pre-order it for delivery on November 17th. And the price is pretty much what you would expect from a new phone. One of their deals is £41 a month with an upfront cost of $49, and that gives you 4 gigs of data, unlimited minutes, unlimited texts. You can buy the phone outright for $594.99, which is, considering the tech and whatnot, is decent, I suppose. But they've got quite a few 24-month contracts. As you can see, there's no difference in price here between the 12 gig of data and the 4 gig of data. I find that a bit strange. Go up to 30 gig of data for $45 a month, 100 gig of data for $49, or if you want absolutely unlimited, 54 Great British pounds per month. Yeah, it just, don't get me wrong, I love the way this phone looks. I think it's going to be a very nice accessory for the gaming crowd to have. If you're a technophile, I'm sure it's going to be a lovely phone. It's definitely going to be great for playing games on the go, and that's, I think, where I'm on the fence, or not even on the fence. I'm really not considering buying the phone because I just don't play games on my phone. I just don't. I've got a gaming tablet. Obviously, I've got consoles. I've got my home PC. The times when, and you can imagine when the prime time is, to do something on your phone, I tend to find myself looking at Twitter, looking at the news, even looking at the Scholarly Gamers Discord. That's how I tend to, when I find myself needing to pass the time on my phone, those are the types of things I do. I'm keeping up to date with news, social media, what's happening. I don't sit and just play games. And, so maybe I'm not in their target demographic. Maybe you guys and gals out there are more prone to playing games on your phones, and if you want a phone to specifically play games on, the Razer Phone looks like it's going to be a very, very good option for that. So it does. Right, next bit of news is from WCCF Tech, and this is about Windows 10, not about the Fall Creators Update, which you either love or hate, or like me, you might have experienced a few issues with the Elgato, which is worth mentioning, by the way. The Elgato HD60 Pro, which had an issue with its firmware, when you updated to the Fall Creators Update. That has now been resolved. If you remember, I talked briefly about there was a workaround where you had to either roll back Windows or take the capture card and physically put it on another computer. All of that's gone. All you have to do is install the new game capture software. It'll update the firmware and the driver for your capture card automatically, and everything should be working fine for you. But I digress. Basically, the article is about Windows 10, and Windows 10, according to WCCF Tech, continues to grow steadily, and it's expected to finally overtake Windows 7 this November. You know, I mean, I know plenty of content creators who have not made the switch to Windows 10 because of fear that things aren't going to work correctly, their software, some of the older capture cards, like some of the very, very, you know, old Black Magics and whatnot. There's a lot of people have been afraid to make that upgrade, and I can understand, you know, hey, if it ain't broke, you know, don't try to fix it. But let's be honest, I mean, some of the features of Windows 10, I just couldn't imagine going back. I remember last year at school, you know, we still were using Windows 7 in the college, and it was just a chore going back to that. And then, so most of my schoolwork, I ended up just choosing to do at home. You know, just for, you can imagine when you're doing things, whether it's through Oracle Virtual Machine, or even just some of the Microsoft applications, or, well, Cisco Packet Tracer, it's just a bit more stable, or a bit quicker, and just an overall better experience than Windows 10. Now, this year, sure enough, the college is upgraded, so it's not that bad. But no, it's quite interesting that, you know, Windows 10 hasn't been well received, especially in the business world. And Microsoft kept trying to, you know, give businesses incentives and education, all of these incentives to try to make the switch over to Windows 10. But according to StatCounter, Windows 7 has seen a drop of 1.32% last month, and so it's now sitting at a market share of about 42%. In comparison, Windows 10 went up about 1.6%, and it's Windows 10 is now currently has a market share of about 40.95. So they're, you know, neck and neck. And looking at the current growth charts, yes, I can see why they're saying if it's going to keep going in these tiny little percentages, Windows 10 definitely is on track. Keep in mind, we've got holiday sales coming up. That, you know, compounded with the steady growth and the new security features that are in Windows 10 and constantly get brought into it. I'm fairly confident we will see Windows 10 finally taking over Windows 7. On the other hand, there's contrasting numbers from Net a Market Share, which is another firm that provides this type of statistical data. And they're saying that Windows 10 is only at 29% compared to Windows 7 46%. So who do we trust? I mean, basically, neither of these numbers are official numbers. Only Microsoft would have the official numbers. Both of these firms calculate their figures by focusing on unique visitors to a whole variety of different websites. So, you know, also Net Market Share considers all the different desktop operating systems, whereas StatCounter, you know, only focuses on Windows. So that maybe makes that lower number, 29%, make sense. Because when you factor in people on Linux and obviously OS, iOS, Mac OS, I don't even remember what they call it these days. Yeah, the Mac OS. That would make sense, I suppose. Right, again, I said this was going to be a short and sweet episode, so I just have one last bit of news, which actually I need to try to get a good image of this. Bear with me just 1 second here. Basically, I was reading just a little bit more. No, okay, sorry. I thought I saw a price here, and I was like, wait, what? Basically, you remember a while back, we saw that the that Elgato announced the 4K 60 Pro, and it looks absolutely stunning. It starts shipping on November 21st. As you can imagine, influencers all over the world, select ones, have already been gifted the Elgato 4K 60 Pro and have been using it, and so far so good. I mean, you look at the stats of this thing, 4K at 60 frames per second. It looks like a nice piece of kit. Now, if you go over to Reddit, there is actually, of course, Elgato's official subreddit, and they have quite a bit of information about the 4K 60 Pro, including the pricing. And this is something that has kind of made a lot of people on the internet, especially streamers, as you can imagine, a bit split. Because let's be honest, the HD 60 Pro, the normal Elgato internal capture card, is relatively inexpensive in the grand scheme of things. When you compare it to Magewell's and other brands, excuse me, the Elgato HD60 Pro is quite affordable. I believe over here in the UK it was just 140, 150 pounds, so I'm assuming just shy of 200 in the States as well, probably 100 and something, 150. The 4K 60 Pro has a recommended retail price of $399. So you can imagine the subreddit and Twitter, social media everywhere, has just individuals saying, oh my god, that's so expensive, that's crazy, that's ridiculous, that's too, how am I supposed to afford that? Well, okay, let's look. If you need a 4K capture card, you've obviously got 4K displays, which last time I checked aren't cheap. You've probably got a console that's capable of 4K, which isn't cheap, or you've got a computer that, PC that can game at 4K, which, come on, we know the specs required to game well, a nice 60 frames per second at 4K, that's not cheap. So let's be honest, if you've got the money for all of that stuff, I don't think $400 for a capture card is going to break the bank, especially when Magewell's equivalent, it's not a direct apples to apples, but the closest thing Magewell has is $800. Yeah, this is still a bargain. It's quite interesting that the subreddit's really good. It gives you all the stats. It shows that, it is going to be taking advantage of a full PCI Express slot. It only operates at ×4, but it does require a ×16 slot. So keep in mind when it comes to your PC, you need to be mindful of how many PCI lanes you have. If you're an older tech like I am, my CPU can only address so many PCI Express lanes. So keep that in mind. Whereas if you're on something newer, or if you're fortunate enough to have something amazing like an i9 or Threadripper, you should be okay. But yeah, you need to keep that in mind. If you're using an M2 SSD, chances are that's taking up 4 Express lane, PCI Express lane slots. And then, if you've got a video card, that's 16. So just between your SSD and your video card, you're already using up 20. So just be mindful of that. One thing that's quite interesting about the 4K 60 Pro is it does support high frame rate capture. At 1080p, it is capable of 120, 144, and 240 Hertz. And at 1440p, it is capable of 120 and 144 Hertz. So, what makes this extremely interesting is a lot of PC gamers and a lot of streamers out there use 1440p. They're playing at 1440p with super high refresh rates, but when they stream, it's either being down to 1080 or even 900. Seen quite a few streamers using 900p, or 720 because of their capture card and their streaming platform's interface. So this opens up a whole new world for streamers out there where they can actually play at 1440. The pass-through will be at 1440, and theoretically they could stream at 1440. depending on the service they use, because obviously higher resolution is going to require higher bit rate to look good. One of the downsides that I see with the 4K 60 Pro is its pass-through and also its capture. It does not capture or pass through HDR video, which is a bit of a bummer, because let's be honest, if you've made that jump to a 4K console, or even, you know, your system's capable of 4K, now you might have bought cheaper panels that don't have HDR, which is I can understand. I know it's expensive, but you're really missing out, because 4K on its own is great, but you really need that high dynamic range to just make those images pop. And so this is another reason why you can see this capture card is priced as low as it is in comparison to other 4K capture cards. It doesn't capture HDR, and it doesn't even have the ability to pass through HDR. So that's a bit of a bummer. Aside from that, though, it does look great. It looks nice. PC requirements are probably going to be relatively high. One of the biggest things is going to be, you know, depending what software you use. If you're not familiar with Elgato internal cards, you know, if you use Elgato's own software, which I know a lot of people don't like to use, you do get, you know, quite a bit of options, because the Elgato's own software allows the card itself to do quite a bit of the heavy lifting and encoding, and something that a lot of people don't realize when you use XSplit and OBS. Yes, obviously the card itself, you know, decodes the image coming in, well, the feed coming in, but it doesn't actually handle encoding. That ends up getting all offloaded onto your broadcasting software. And so sure enough, the 4K 60 Pro is going to require a beefy graphics card, because it's going to, you know, it's going to need a good CPU as well, just to do. You can imagine if you are streaming or encoding at 720 and you make the jump to 1080, and you see how much more processing power that requires. 4K takes even more. So for recording, forget streaming for a moment, for just recording, you're going to probably need quite a beefy GPU, a graphics card, in order to do that encoding on the fly. Because 4K CPU encoding, yeah, that takes quite a bit of horsepower, and you're going to need a very decent CPU that's fairly well cooled, I would imagine, to handle that fully. But anyway, we'll be interested to see some full-blown reviews of the 4K 60 Pro as time goes on, and obviously after the actual release date later this month. Well, look, that is us for this week. Again, sorry it's just myself this week, and I know it's a fairly short episode. I just wanted to keep things simple. And next week, though, hopefully, we will be talking about the Project Scorpio version of the Xbox One X, which should be here on Tuesday. I do not have 4K displays to take full advantage of it, but hey, it's fine, it'll happen, it'll come later. In the meantime, what we can do is we can have a look at some of the features of, see if the games are running better at 1080. I don't know if they will. They claim they will, but hey, we'll find out. Also, we'll want to see, there's some games that have 4K assets, and we'll see if we can get some of those to actually run with the super sampling. I think Gears of War 4 was one. Don't know if Ghost Recon Wildlands is going to have it at launch or not, but we will find out next week. In the meantime, look, check out scholarlygamers.com for all the latest reviews and articles. If you've got a bit of time in your hands, I highly suggest you check out the Assassin's Creed Origins review. There's a lot of information there. Not spoiling information, just a lot of information to keep you going. Which, of course, Scholarly Gamer himself gave away a copy of Assassin's Creed Origins on PS4 last night. So congratulations to the winner of that giveaway. And yeah, just check out scholarlygamers.com to stay up to date with news and reviews. Also, make sure to check out our YouTube channel. Just search for Scholarly Gamers, you should find it. We're hoping to add more content as time goes by. And of course, come hop in the Discord. Come say hi, come see what we're all about, and just have fun. Right, anyway, guys and gals, that's me for this week. Do have a good weekend, and I will catch you next week. Hopefully next time with some guests. Thanks for watching.